Stephen Breyer, Ukraine, and voting rights. I'm Foday Sillah, and this is the Square Circle. Hello and welcome to the Square Circle. I'm your host, Foday Sillah. Joining us today are Libertarian and Senior Fellow at Cato Institute, Doug Bandow.
How you doing, Foday? Nice to be on.
Nice to see you again, Doug. Next up is conservative editor of the College Fix, Jennifer Kabbany.
Hello, thanks for having me.
And finally, Progressive Executive Director of ReproAction, Erin Matson.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. Welcome, everybody. This week, Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer announced he will be stepping down from the court. Here's his retirement announcement.
But we have a country that is based on human rights, democracy, and so forth. But I'll tell you what Lincoln thought, what Washington thought, and what people today still think. It's an experiment. And I found some letters that George Washington wrote where he said the same thing. It's an experiment. That experiment existed then because even the liberals in Europe, they're looking over here and they're saying it's a great idea in principle, but it'll never work. But we'll show them it does. That's what Washington thought. And that's what Lincoln thought. And that's what people still think today. And I say, well, I want you, and I'm talking to the students now. I say, I want you to pick just this up. It's an experiment that's still going on. And I'll tell you something. You know who will see whether that experiment works? It's you, my friend.
So do you guys believe that there's a collusion that's involved? That's why he retired so early, to give Biden enough time to find a replacement? And I'm going to start off with Miss Matson.
Thank you, Foday. Yeah, so first off, I just want to salute outgoing Justice Breyer, who's been an incredible Supreme Court justice, standing up for human rights, democracy, and the rule of law in the United States. He left an incredible imprint. As someone, I work in my career on reproductive health rights and justice. He's been a stalwart ally, just a really fantastic justice. So he will be missed. To the point, he is 83 years old, and he had been facing pressure from liberal groups, some liberal groups, to step down while Democrats still held power in Congress to confirm another Supreme Court justice. At this point, it's a 50-50 split in the Senate, with Vice President Kamala Harris being able to address a tie. And if he had not retired now, there is a very reasonable chance that the balance of power could shift in the Senate. And as we saw with Mitch McConnell, when he's been majority leader, he blocks Democratic nominees from coming through. So while this appointment or the change in the court wouldn't reflect a shift in the balance of power, I do believe, Justice Breyer had made multiple statements along the way when he was facing this pressure that he would make his decision on his own terms, but that he would consider the environment as part of the overall policy and political environment when he was making his decision.
And as she's saying, does anybody else agree with her words, or?
Well, justices typically make their own decisions. I mean, Ruth Bader Ginsburg did not retire early, and she was urged by a lot of progressives to do so. I mean, justices, view this as a seat to which they've been appointed. It's a lifetime appointment. And we've seen a lot of justices die in office. William Rehnquist on the right. I mean, there've been a lot over the years. My guess is that Breyer, he's the oldest member of the court. He's been there almost, again, you go back to the 90s, he was a Clinton appointee, a long career, distinguished career. he's probably looking at the political calendar and bringing that into consideration. It may not have been his entire decision, but he may have been looking and saying, I'm ready to leave in the next couple of years. If you're thinking that, then it's better to leave this year, allowing Biden and a Democratic majority, I mean, a very narrow majority, but majority to rule on that appointment. If you wait till 2023 and the Republicans have retaken the Senate, then it's a completely different game. If you wait longer and there's a Republican president, again, it's a completely different game. So I'd say it's probably part of the decision. It's probably not the entire decision.
And Ms. Kabbany, do you agree with what he just said about his decision on retirement?
I do. I think it's a combination of age. I also think it's a combination of the pressure he was facing. At one point, there was a truck parked outside of the front of the Supreme Court with big bold letters, retire Breyer. So, he was facing some outside pressure. But in terms of strategy and timing, some pundits argue that Republicans are more motivated than Democrats when it comes to the makeup of the Supreme Court, and question whether it's going to be a good time to bring a nominee right before the midterm elections. It could fire up the GOP base in an election year that's already looking to weigh heavily in favor of Republicans.
Also this week, Russia and the United States continue to discuss Moscow's military buildup on Ukraine's borders. Here's the story from CBS News.
A Russian military show of force today on the country's western border with Ukraine, and no signs that Vladimir Putin plans to back down. That's why President Biden, shopping today at a small business in Washington, says he may soon deploy to Eastern Europe some of the almost 9,000 U.S. troops he's put on heightened alert.
I may be moving some of those troops in the nearer term, just because it takes time. And again, it's not provocative.
Several thousand U.S. troops already in Europe also could be repositioned, but the growing Allied response force is still no match for Putin's roughly 100,000 troops on the ground. At this point, almost completely encircling Ukraine.
So, the question I have today is, what I see from all of this is USA is sending troops now. A few NATO countries are also sending troops. My question to Mr. Bandow is, do you believe that all of this ruckus, as people say, will start a brand new World War III?
Thankfully, no, because the president has made very clear Ukraine is not a member of NATO. There is no U.S. defense commitment. So the U.S. will not be putting troops into Ukraine. It'd be extraordinarily foolish to do so. If you look at a map, you realize that Russia has an extraordinary geographic advantage, has a very serious military, and this matters a lot more to them than it does to us. We may not like what the Russians are doing, but the honest truth is, if the Russians had done to us what we did to them, we'd be on the brink of war as well. Imagine Russia showing up, helping stage a coup d'etat in Mexico City, inviting Mexico to join the Warsaw Pact. These are acts that would cause Washington to be in a frenzy. So it's a very serious issue. The last thing we want to do is get involved militarily, and this is where we need a mix of threats of sanctions and costs that the Russians would pay, as well as some diplomatic give. That is, there's no reason to bring Ukraine into NATO. And the dirty secret of NATO is no one wants them to come in. We're all lying to Ukraine. Everybody tells Ukraine how much we love them and how all they have to do is fix a couple of things and they'll come in. No one believes that. So what we should do is be honest about that and say they're not coming in. Now let's talk about troop deployments and other things, which the Russians have to make concessions to. I think there's a possibility of working out a deal. World War III is the last thing anyone wants, including the Russians.
Now, Ms. Matson, Mr. Bandow does not believe the USA should be involved or there is going to be a World War III. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I'm pretty concerned. I will say that one of the first things I do when I wake up in the morning and I turn on the TV news, I'm afraid of what's happened over there at that Russian and Ukrainian border. We know that Vladimir Putin is seeking to expand his territory. He'd already Annex would be one word to use for it, but seized land in the Crimea. We know that the troops continue to mount. We know that there are concerns within the intelligence community that Russia would try to plant false flags or attacks as a pretext for a bigger attacks. You know, I disagree with Doug's assessment of NATO. I do think there is a positive role for NATO in Europe, and specifically, I think it's really important with the U.S. as a democratic nation at a time when we're fighting authoritarianism around the world. You know, Ukraine has the right to self-determination, and if Ukraine wants to be a part of NATO, it's certainly not the Russian president's prerogative to say that Ukraine can't do that, and he certainly shouldn't be backing that up with troops on the border. So it's a situation to be really concerned about. I'm deeply concerned on sort of the global political front with it. I'm really concerned about what appears to be growing alliance between both Russia and China, who are both becoming more bellicose. So I sincerely hope that Doug is correct, that World War is not on the way, but it's a concerning situation.
And Ms. Kabbany seems to have a split right now. Where do you side?
Well, if you're asking me if I think we should, as a nation of America, get involved in this skirmish, my gut is telling me not really. We have a lot of problems that we face here at home. The Afghanistan debacle after 20 years, what did we really accomplish there? You know, withdrawing so poorly as we did under Biden. I just wonder, is this really where we want to go next? I mean, aren't there enough problems that America's facing, including on its own borders, that we really want to get involved in, you know, Ukraine and Russia and, you know, China, I think, is a bigger threat. And with regard to World War III, you know, it's interesting. I wonder if World War III is going to really be fought like traditional wars, or will it be more about, you know, money and technology, cyber war, and that kind of thing. And so it's a really interesting time that we're living in. But my preference would be that Biden just focuses on, you know, the problems that America faces right now.
Foday, can I add a little something?
Oh, go ahead, please.
If you're, you know, the countries to make the decision on NATO membership is not Ukraine. It's the U.S. and other members of NATO. And the simple question is, are we prepared to go to nuclear war with a nuclear armed power over Ukraine? And you know, you've got to ask that. And the reality is Ukraine is not a national security interest for America. So are we prepared for that? Because that's what we're talking about. And again, imagine if the Russians showed up and said they wanted to make Mexico part of the Warsaw Pact. What would we think? So we've just got to make prudential judgments here. And frankly, the more contentious your relationship with Russia, the more likely the Russians will work with the Chinese. And this is a very real, serious issue. They're the number 2 and 3 military powers. China's the second ranking economic power, and they are working together. And they will, as long as they perceive the United States as being a bigger foe of them than they are to each other. And they have a lot of contrasting interests, but at the moment, they both hate us more than they hate each other. So we need to keep that in mind as we make these policies as well.
You know, I'd like to add one thing as well, if I might, Foday. I mean,
go ahead.
One thing that I think I'm hearing from my conservative and libertarian counterparts is this idea that the issue between Russia and Ukraine, it's about Ukraine. And I would argue that, you know, just to look back at our very recent history, the impeachment of Donald Trump was over Russia and Ukraine, and specifically looking at the ways that the previous president, who is seeking, who's making every move as if he is seeking office again, was rightfully interpreted by many people as somewhat of a Russian puppet. I mean, the fact of the matter is, this isn't something that's just happening over there. Russia's aims on controlling Ukraine had already roiled our domestic politics, and so I think there's more interwovenness than maybe portrayed.
And Ms. Kabbany, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I'm calling to mind that, wasn't it Hunter Biden that made a ton of money off of Burisma, the Ukrainian, energy company. I mean, if anything, isn't it look odd that Biden is jumping to the defense of a country who and his own son profited greatly from? So I'm kind of wondering if that wouldn't be more of a conflict of interest than Trump just asking, the Ukrainian government to look into that.
Finally, the final news for today is Democrats' voting rights bill went down in flames in the Senate. Here's ABC's news coverage.
Good morning. It was a very late night here on Capitol Hill, and it ended in a blistering defeat for President Biden just 1 year into office. Voting rights legislation failing once again in the Senate. Every Republican senator voting against it, calling it a power grab, a federal takeover of the election system. The measure would have made Election Day a federal holiday. It would have expanded mail-in voting, early voting. Every Democrat supported this, and they tried a last-ditch effort to change the Senate rules to pass it without any Republican support. But that was blocked by two members of the president's own party, Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Kyrsten Sinema.
Does this seem to bring back memories of the old days? And when I mean old days, I mean laws from the past that prevented certain people from voting simply because they wanted to keep power on one side. And I am going to start this question with Ms. Kabbany.
Thanks. So I don't think it's racist to want somebody to show their ID to vote. You have to show an ID to get a driver's license or buy alcohol or ride on an airplane or rent a house or get married. I mean, I think it's actually discriminatory to suggest that asking for an ID is racist, because what are you suggesting, that people of color can't get an ID or show their ID? I've never understood why, requiring an ID to vote is considered racist. It just doesn't seem, and even polls show that 80% of Americans support, voter ID laws. So I just, wonder why that was such a sticking point. I think we all can agree. I mean, nowadays you can't even get into a restaurant in DC without showing a vaccine card. So I'm just, at what point are we saying, okay, showing your ID to vote is not that big of a deal? And then the problem with the mail-in ballots is they present a potential for extreme fraud. So the Heritage Foundation maintains a voter fraud map. So the Heritage Foundation is a think tank in Washington, D.C., and they chronicle any time that somebody's criminally convicted or found, guilty by a court of law of voter fraud. Before this show, I looked, there's been 50 such examples since 2020. Fraudulent use of absentee ballots, ineligible voting, duplicate voting, false registrations. So, what's really going on is the Republicans are trying to enshrine election integrity, not block people from voting.
Ms. Matson, do you have any thing to say?
I have lots of thoughts. Yes.
Please do. Please.
So I think, we live in a democracy and we should be really proud of that fact. The United States is a country that has a beautiful set of founding documents and principles. And over time, we are working more and more to live up to the wonderful ideals upon which this country was founded. And I think that expanding access to vote is critical. And so it's a number of things. First of all, it's so sad to see that this effort failed in the Senate, and truly want to say unequivocally shame on Senator Kyrsten Sinema and shame on Senator Joe Manchin for siding with the obstructionists to block this from moving forward. There are a number of common sense things that we can do to expand access to voting. And we found during this pandemic that early voting is very popular, that mail-in voting is great, that it works, that it's secure, that it's safe. And a lot of these attempts at voter suppression are really quite blatant. Just this week, there's a county in Georgia where there are 7 different polling places, and they're trying to condense those 7 different places down to 1, primarily impacting people of color. In the last 2 weeks or so, you've had Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida proposing some sort of hired, what he calls an election protection squad or some sort, but essentially people out to intimidate people at the polls. When we see items designed to suppress the vote, like you can't provide water to people waiting in line. I mean, that's just ridiculous. And so I think, there's a lot of great things that we can do in terms of IDs. I think one of the most exciting things that we could do to increase access to voting is automatic motor voter, right? So if somebody gets a driver's license, automatically register them as a voter. I also want to applaud the work that has happened in some states, including in the Commonwealth of Virginia, under the leadership of couple administrations ago, under the leadership of Governor Terry McAuliffe, expanding voting rights for convicted felons who'd been released. I mean, I think letting people vote is a really important cornerstone of democracy. We should be doing more of it, not less.
Okay, and Mr. Bandow, do you have anything?
Well, this, as is obvious, this is a highly political area.
Yes.
And it strikes me both sides play games and both sides have some good ideas. I mean, one problem with the legislation before the Congress was traditionally and constitutionally, elections are handled by states. The federal government has limited authority over that. And if you believe in kind of applying the Constitution, there are limits in terms of what the feds can do. And arguably this legislation overstepped that. And second, there's a lot of gamesmanship. I mean, Senator Schumer's home state of New York has more limited rules on, for example, mail voting, absentee voting than Georgia. I mean, why isn't he fixing his home state? Why is he complaining about someone else? It strikes me that both sides have ideas that can be drawn upon. I mean, we don't want to suppress the vote, and I think that's right, and I think it's a danger. But I don't see why, showing an idea is a bad idea. But I also believe that allowing felons, people who've done their time to vote is a good idea. We want to integrate people back into society. I don't see any reason why you don't treat people as full members of society once they've done their time. We want to reintegrate them and make them, full citizens again. So it strikes me you can draw on both those, that mail voting, has been very successful, but we do have to have some safeguards there. And you've run into issues of kind of ballot harvesting, especially in California. You have to worry when, interest groups show up to people's homes and collect ballots. Well, do they turn them all in? I mean, there are issues here that I think are legitimate. I wish we could actually come at this in a bipartisan way to say, how do we ensure that everyone has an opportunity to vote, but we also have some, safeguards there to ensure that we don't have fraud? Because I think both those positions are important. And what we've seen politically is both sides play the game for their own advantage, and the American voters are losers as a result.
And I'll go back to Ms. Kabbany. Mr. Bandow said that he would prefer if people who just came out of incarceration are allowed to vote. And Ms. Matson said that everybody who has a license should automatically be allowed to vote. Do you have any disagreement with those statements, or are you on par with them?
Well, I will say there's something I do support. I am in support of making Election Day a federal holiday. I hate how everybody has to crowd the ballot places after work, and the line is long and it takes forever. So I'm absolutely for the federal holiday idea and just giving everybody the time that it takes to vote, in person, safely and securely, with integrity, and then they know that one man, one vote counts. So, we can find compromise. We can find bipartisan reform together. I think there's places that Republicans are willing to give, and I know the Democrats want it too. So let's work together without disenfranchising one side or the other.
And if I could just add one thing, one area that we certainly should move on is clarifying the act on electoral votes. We are very lucky that Vice President Pence recognized he had no policy role in deciding whether or not to accept electoral votes. The plan to try to get Donald Trump reelected, despite the fact he lost, was to have the vice president reject votes from states and then have that election go to the House of Representatives. It's a ministerial act. The vice president was right, did what he was supposed to. That's one where we need Congress to act and make very clear what the process is for electoral votes, how it works, what the limitations are. We don't ever want to be in a situation like we were in last January 6th.
Now, let's take some questions from our viewers. Okay, the first question we have, and I will probably butcher this name, and forgive me for that, is Yati Hunt. And the question is, do you think Biden will nominate a hardcore progressive judge or moderate who would get Republican support?
Well, I would personally love if Biden would nominate a hardcore progressive judge. However, I think, Biden has always had moderate instincts, and I believe that he will put forward a very qualified nominee. He said he intends to nominate the first Black woman to be nominated to the Supreme Court. There's a very impressive bench of Black women who meet that, who would be well qualified to sit on the Supreme Court. And I look forward to seeing a swift confirmation for her.
Mr. Bandow?
No, I think he'll certainly make a progressive appointment, but I don't think it'll be a radical. And as Erin indicated, there are some very qualified people there. And frankly, there are Republicans who traditionally have voted for qualified nominees. Susan Collins is one. She typically votes for Democratic nominated candidates. One of the Black women being considered, who's was approved last year as a federal appellate court, received votes from Murkowski of Alaska, Collins, and also Lindsey Graham, who's been, despite his kind of crazy warmongering tendencies, is one who actually on the bench issues has tended to be more bipartisan and believes that presidents are entitled to make appointments, and he's voted for Democratic nominees. So my guess is the president on this will probably get, if he nominates one of these top potential nominees, he'll get 53, 54, 55 votes.
And Ms. Kabbany?
Yeah, I just want somebody who's going to interpret the Constitution fairly and not try to legislate from the bench. That's all I can ask for here.
And our second question comes from Alvin Bradley. And his question is, what could the U.S. offer to Putin to give him an off-ramp to the Ukraine crisis?
Well, I think the Biden administration is working very hard to try to find off-ramps, but the reality is that Putin is in a very bellicose posture, and I'm just not sure if he's interested in an off-ramp. In fact, he's very interested in expanding his dominance over Eastern Europe. And so I think he's going to do what he's going to do. It's the question is the international community just going to let him do it and roll over? Or will he be met with challenges?
I think what would help, number one, is if we were no longer so sanctimonious. Documents have been declassified. We lied to the Russians. We lied to the Soviets about expanding NATO. We told them, don't worry, we won't. We promoted revolutions in Tbilisi and in Kiev, including tossing out an elected pro-Russian president. These things, and we've talked about bringing both Georgia, that is their Georgia, not ours, and Ukraine into NATO. And I would just say, if the Russians did all that to us, we'd be talking about war. And and we believe in kind of spheres of influence. I mean, this is one of those crazy things. Is what is the Monroe Doctrine? I mean, we've beaten up every Latin American country that's ever existed. We run 2 years ago, John Bolton was talking about the Monroe Doctrine for Venezuela and telling the Chinese and Russians to stay out. So we might be a little less sanctimonious. And to my mind, the starting point is to say, look, we don't plan on bringing Ukraine into NATO. That's not on our agenda. Now let's talk about serious issues of troops, of missiles, of deployments, which means you have to back down and we'll back down. And we'll find a way here to step back from this confrontation, neutralize Ukraine, but leave it free to develop. Let's find a way here to live together and not have World War III.
All right.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
What's worse, letting Putin have Ukraine or letting the Taliban have Afghanistan? You know what I mean? I'm just saying, so we could let the Taliban, which forces women to stay in their homes and cover themselves from head to toe and, forced castration in some cases, but we're all upset about Russia. Then why did we leave Afghanistan? Where are we deciding what we get involved in and what we don't?
Well, I think people on all sides of the political spectrum were sickened by the Afghanistan withdrawal, which was very much botched. I mean, I don't think there's any way around that. It was a endless war that was going on, and Biden said that he was going to withdraw, and he did, and it was absolutely horrific to watch what was happening. But I think that's, the fact of the matter is that has been done now, and that is a different situation than another country looking like it's about to invade another country.
And I'd say President Biden deserves credit for courage. He took us out. Donald Trump talked about it for 4 years and didn't. President Obama didn't like doing what he did. He twice increased troops. Now, the problem is Biden did it badly, but the idea of sticking around for another 20, 50, 100 years to bring democracy to Central Asia, that was simply not the American purpose, and it wasn't a good use of American resources. It's sad it went down the way it did. I mean, I visited there. There are a lot of good people who are in a very bad situation today, but I give the president credit.
And now it's time for the most underrated story of the week. Who would like to go first?
So we have a story on the College Fix today. It's our top story. And essentially it's about Nicole Hannah-Jones, the project manager, creator of the 1619 Project. And so she got paid $55,000 for basically a 1-hour speech at the University of Wisconsin-Madison for its MLK celebration. And I am so flabbergasted that we would pay somebody. I mean, apparently it was private money, but $55,000 for a 1-hour speech. By the way, we had one of our students attend, and she just basically bashed Republicans the whole time. But I'm actually more offended that she got paid $55,000 for a 1-hour speech. Maybe that's the going rate, and I could be out of the loop. But, I have friends, family, whatever, 55,000, that's what they make in a year.
Well, the U.S. has long been in the pocket of the Saudis and the Emiratis. They have spent 7 years slaughtering Yemeni civilians after intervening in the civil war over there. President Biden said he was going to treat Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince slice and dice, the guy who basically had Jamal Khashoggi killed, the journalist. He was going to treat him as a pariah. Well, the administration has gotten in bed with the Saudis. But the Yemeni insurgents are shooting back, and they actually landed some drones in Abu Dhabi. Now, Abu Dhabi, in the United Arab Emirates, is the kind of business center. It's the main transit center by airports. I've flown through there many times. Everyone is freaked out. The administration has just put out a travel advisory saying Americans shouldn't travel there. This could have reverberations across the Middle East. People are talking about whether they might shoot at the Israelis. What that would happen. The administration's talking about treating the Houthis, the insurgents, as terrorists. I mean, this could have extraordinary ripples in the Middle East and beyond.
And finally, Ms. Matson, you have anything to add?
I do. So my most underreported story of the week. So this past weekend marked the 49th and possibly last anniversary of Roe versus Wade, the very important decision that affirmed the federal constitutional right to abortion. And on the day before that anniversary, there was the annual anti-abortion march in Washington, D.C., the March for Life. And at the March for Life, the violent white supremacist, white nationalist group Patriot Front was there marching in there. And March for Life gave a really mealy-mouthed statement that didn't really forcefully object to their presence. I think we're going to see more and more of these overt ties between white nationalists and white supremacists and the anti-abortion movement. And I also want to note that just today, Frank Pavone, who's the head of Priests for Life, tweeted, you can go look on his page, what's wrong with being white? What's wrong with being a nationalist? They're both good. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he said. And you can go look at the exact language there. So I think that's the most underreported story of the week.
Thank you guys for those stories. Everybody, please go check them out. All right. That's all we have time for. Thank you to our guests, and thank you for watching or listening to The Square Circle. I'm Foday Sillah. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video to give it a 5-star rating on your podcast platform. We'll see you next week.